Janine Spitalnik, born March 14th, 1938, lived in Paris, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, September 1942, age 4. Israel Weissman, lived in Houghton, killed by the Nazis in Kamenets-Podolsk on August 28, 1941, age 7. Mania Velodnitsky, lived in Olevsk, killed by the Nazis in Malin, age 10. Maurice Wochenmarkt, born July 18, 1938, lived in Antwerp, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1943, age 5. Rashka Adzen, lived in Krakow, age 7. Nomi Braf, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, May 26, 1944, age 2. Natalie Krokonicki, lived in Zembrov, age 3. Ella Belenkaya, born 1936, lived in Pochep, killed by the Nazis in Pochep, 1942, age 6. Olia Murzhinskaya, born 1938, lived in Nadorf, killed by the Nazis in Nadorf, 1941, age 3. Friedrich Winterstein, born April 13, 1943, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, December 29, 1943, age 1. Fedia Popievsky, born 1940, lived in Vakhnovka, killed by the Nazis in Vakhnovka in 1942, age 2. Adolcha Bergstein, lived in Podlezny, killed by the Nazis in Belzec on July 23, 1942, age 10. Israel Waldman, born 1939, lived in Halabina, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944, age 5. Ludmila Yanukovych, born 1941, lived in Konstantinovka, killed by the Nazis in December 1941, age 1. Yunik Geryansky, born 1936, killed by the Nazis in Novozlatopol in 1941, age 5. Pearl Wax, lived in Vis, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, May 1944, age 5. Mendu Brach, born July 21, 1935, lived in Sator-la-Julej, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz on May 1944, age 9. Jacob Kleinhandler, lived in Krakow, killed by the Nazis in Krakow, age 8. Bruka Kopolovich, born 1935, lived in Kranikovko, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944, age 9. Shekev Schwartz, born 1937, lived in Vasaro Sanemny, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, age 7. Hriz Odenstein, lived in Krinky, killed by the Nazis in Treblinka in 1942, age 1. Suzanne Koifman, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944, age 8. Yoshia Goldbloss, born 1939, lived in Kielce, killed by the Nazis in Kielce on May 29, 1943, age 4. Elka Zeigel, born 1929, lived in Podobish, died age 10, killed by the Nazis age 10. Tispa Kodish, born 1938, killed by the Nazis in Levani in 1941, age 3. Ishak Hasid, born 1936, lived in Thessaloniki, killed by the Nazis, age 8. Andrea Schossberger, born August 28, 1939, lived in Novi Sad, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944, age 5. Cecil Vogelmann, lived in Firenze, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944, age 9. Asni Chadash, born 1938, lived in Meadel, killed by the Nazis on September 21st, 1942, age 4. Elena Lyachenko, born 1933 in Kiev, killed by the Nazis in Makeup in 1941, age 8. Genia Zabran, born 1935 in Uman, killed by the Nazis in Uman in 1941, age 6. Nyosa Jewers, born August 30th, 1933 in Mikulnis, killed by the Nazis in Belzec on August 29th, 1942, age 9. Nelly Kukerman, born 1935, lived in Paris, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1942, age 7. Bella Idashenko, born 1937 in Novobelitsa, killed by the Nazis in Dobryanka in 1941, age 4. Stamo Semu, born in 1939, lived in Volos, killed by the Nazis in Birkenau on April 11th, 1944, age 5. Fajia Zajong, born in 1941, lived in Kutno, killed by the Nazis in Helmno, age 1. Yosel Weber, lived in Warsaw, killed by the Nazis in Warsaw in 1943, age 9. Tuvia Friedman, born in 1940 in Prislop, killed by the Nazis, age 4. Mikhail Yazemsky, born in 1936, lived in Mogilev Podolsky, killed by the Nazis in Mogilev Podolsky, age 6. Yosef Milkov, born in 1932, lived in Slonim, killed by the Nazis in Slonim in 1941, age 9. Alice Friedman, lived in Svalava, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944, age 5. Estki Lipschitz, born in 1933, lived in Sobat, killed by the Nazis in Sobat on June 22nd, 1941, age 8. Jenta Boszkowski, lived in Bialystok, killed by the Nazis in Treblinka in 1943, age 9. Royce Brody, born in 1934, lived in Mudkats, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944, age 10. Tommy Weiss, lived in Budapest, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, age 8. Barak Danziger, born in 1939, lived in Kalusin, killed by the Nazis in Treblinka in 1942, age 3. Iwa Herzlich, lived in Manewitz, killed by the Nazis in Manewitz in 1942, age 4. Yantel Nutovitz, born in 1942, lived in Mukax, killed by the Nazis in Birkenau on April 15, 1944, age 2. Frumat Stein, lived in Kolosvar, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, age 4. Ilya Estrov, born in 1940, lived in Shmilino, killed by the Nazis in Shmilino on November 19, 1941, age 1. Shalom Fixler, born in 1935, lived in Majdan, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944, age 9. Abram Shamil, born in 1934, lived in Lomza, killed by the Nazis in 1941, age 7. Yokevet Birkenstad, lived in Czestochowa, killed by the Nazis in Treblinka, 1942, age 10. Lulu Anhorn, born in 1938, lived in Siget, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944, age 6. Israel Vellner, born in 1934, lived in Władysław, died in Kilch, killed by the Nazis in 1942, age 8. Fanny Levy, lived in Kavala, killed by the Nazis in Treblinka, 1943, age 7. Miriam Zamlinsky, born 1935, lived in Mazchana, killed by the Nazis, 1942, age 7. Annette Spring, lived in Paris, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, age 5. Elsa Grossman, born 1932, lived in Vine, killed by the Nazis, age 10. Irvin Cohn, lived in Samoria, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 2. Kati Kellner, born 1939, lived in near Bator, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz on May 26, 1944, age 5. Pearl Lefkowitz, lived in Papa, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 8. Haya Fruchter, born 1935, lived in Solatvina, killed by the Nazis in 1944, age 9. Tamas Hutire, born 1937, lived in Budapest, killed by the Nazis in 1944, age 7. Hinko Gervik, born 1940, lived in Somber, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 4. Mos Markovit, born 1936, lived in Bakovo, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 8. Esther Kaufman, born 1936, lived in Dragomir-Resti, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 8. Anna Levina, born 1936, lived in Minsk, killed by the Nazis in Minsk in 1943, age 7. Jutka Roth, born 1938, lived in near Bator, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944, age 6. Oscar Weiss, born 1938, lived in Nagyapos, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 6. Tommy Jacobson, born 1938, lived in Nyagibanya, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 6. Anika O'Cone, born 1940, lived in Nagyvarad, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz on May 28, 1944, age 4. Mordechai Purwe, born 1934, lived in Kona, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz on July 27, 1944, age 10. Sarika Kami, lived in Didi Mothkiton, killed by the Nazis in Birkenau in 1943, age 6. Jenno Hartstein, lived in Margita, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz on May 25, 1944, age 6. Abraham Herskew, lived in Piatra Neamt, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, age 7. Israel Gervitz, born 1937, lived in Daugavpils, killed by the Nazis in Daugavpils in 1941, age 4. Josie Hoffman, born 1941, lived in Nagyvarad, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 3. Rizard Weinstock, lived in Przemyśl, killed by the Nazis in Belgium, 1942, age 6. Evie Windsor, lived in Hadoussabolzo, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 1. George Singer, born 1934, lived in Castelli, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 10. Ilse Schwab, lived in Stuttgart, killed by the Nazis in Majdanek, age 10. Shaje Milsker, born 1934, lived in Melnis, killed by the Nazis in Melnis, 1942, age 10. Janina Cohen, lived in Kozy, killed by the Nazis in Radizwilo on May 29, 1942, age 3. Rincia Zins, born 1934, lived in Lvov, killed by the Nazis in Lvov in 1944, age 10. Rebecca Levy, lived in Kavala, killed by the Nazis in Treblinka in 1943, age 4. Claudine Malach, born March 14, 1939, lived in Paris, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1943, age 4. Gitla Luzankowski, lived in 1941 in Belchatow, killed by the Nazis in Chemno in September 1942, age 1. Sarinka Groybard, born in 1938, lived in Kielce, died in Kielce, or killed by the Nazis in Kielce, May 29, 1943, age 5. Lotte Frischmann, lived in St. Polten, killed by the Nazis in 1942, age 4. Jakov Kabiljo, born in 1933, lived in Sepchi, killed by the Nazis in Stara Gradiska, 1942, age 8. Jeno Jupiter, born in 1940, lived in Soltvatkert, killed by the Nazis in camp in 1944, age 4. Ishak Libovitz, born in 1943, lived in Toplita, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz on June 10, 1944, age 1. Jacob Bronner, lived in Krakow, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, age 9. Zuza Loeffler, born in 1936, lived in Skorna, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944, age 8. Jerzik Hirsch, born in 1937, lived in Golub, killed by the Nazis in Mir in 1941, age 4. Zvi Kalach, born in 1941, killed by the Nazis in Kamenitz in 1942, age 1. Nikolaus Hoffman, born in 1933, lived in Ip, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 7. Georgi Hirschfeld, born in 1938, lived in Vak, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in June 1944, age 6.